just a bright one. Now I see it like, cause baby, you the right one. Dancer, she got me moving like she's Spanish. Yeah, I'll be a fine, no stressing, count blessings.
All right, Bobbi, go ahead.
All right. So my name is Bobbi Wheaton. I'm sitting here with two of my favorite students, although I shouldn't say that, should I?
But the truth.
Yeah, it's the truth, right? Before coming here, when I lived in New Jersey, central New Jersey, I taught for over 20 years in public schools and Catholic schools initially, teaching mostly history and literature. I have my bachelor's degree in liberal studies, and I have my master's degree in American history.
Nice. Oh, that's
And
cool.
I'll say it now. These views only represent me. That's it. Not on behalf of anyone else, just me. My personal view.
Perfect. Was there a big difference, like, from like Catholic schools and public schools from when you've been teaching?
Oh, yeah. Oh, yes. Very big difference. I'd say the Catholic schools, there was more discipline involved, of course. And there was always kind of like this feeling with, I think, the students that they were afraid to do something wrong and act up in class, because I think not only did they think, oh, the principal's going to hear about it, who was a nun, but then the priest is going to hear about it, and maybe God will hear about it. And so there was always kind of this underlying feeling that we kind of have to behave. So the behavior issues were very, very minimal. And there was much more, I think, a sense of community. Community, yeah. The Catholic schools. I wasn't even Catholic. I'm not even Catholic. But I loved teaching there because the sense of community, not just between the teacher and students, but the teacher and the church as well, and the parents. The parents knew, working in Catholic school, we got paid half what public school teachers get paid. And so the parents were very... very grateful for...
To those teachers.
Sorry?
To the teachers, like...
To the teachers, very grateful, because they looked at it almost like you were doing it as a calling, because you were paid so much less than public school teachers. But some of my favorite memories, and again, I'm not Catholic at all, but some of my favorite memories were on the days that we'd have to take the students to Mass, which we had to do on, I don't know if it was a monthly basis, and then... for holidays. And I loved taking them over to the church and sitting there through Mass with them.
Was there a difference in like the curriculum and what was taught between the Catholic school and public education?
No, they both had their curriculums and state curriculums to follow. But because the Catholic school is not funded publicly, there's more leeway there, a little more leeway. But they still had rigorous curriculum that they wanted you to adhere to. It was, of course, they taught religion, which is not taught in public school, but it was pretty on par. The only difference that I really could say is that if you were a student who had special needs, you had a diagnosed learning disability, then probably a public school was better, at least just in my experience teaching, because we would... do our best. We had students with challenges, with academic challenges in the Catholic school, but sometimes the public schools, especially in New Jersey, they're outstanding. But sometimes the public schools would have more services available to them and more personnel that would help them. And Catholic school, we had personnel available that were wonderful and great with the students, and we had students there who had academic challenges who did great. But probably for the more challenging disabilities that students might encounter or learning issues they might encounter, sometimes the public schools were a better place for them. And it wasn't often that we had to have that discussion with parents, because we usually would be able to take care of it ourselves at school and surround those students with the proper, basic skills support or a special ed teacher. It's just that there's more of them and more individualized
Just more
services.
resources.
More resources at public school, because the Catholic schools don't get the money that the public schools. Public schools are publicly funded. Catholic schools are not.
Yeah, what do you think about religion in school, just out of curiosity? You think it should be taught, shouldn't be taught? Should it be equal amongst all religions if it is taught? Do you think there should be a focus on a specific...
No, I don't think there should be a focus on a specific religion. I don't have an issue with exposing it to children, but I don't think it should be its own specialized class. Like, okay, we're not going to go to religion class. But I think so many students now are missing out. This has happened as I've gotten older. I've started to feel this way, that students nowadays and younger people, I feel like there's almost like a lack of, a higher power. And not to get into a religious conversation, but I feel like it's almost like they dismiss religion altogether. And that idea that there's something out there bigger than me has kind of allowed some to become a little lost.
And do you think that's because of the lack of teaching in school, like public school?
Like technology, maybe even
I think technology has a lot to do with it, but I think it's just that as many people don't go to church. And again, I mean, I was brought up, we went to church every week, and I resented it when I was young. When you're young, you don't want to go, and I resented it very much.
Most kids tend to.
Yeah, kids hate
kids
it.
Just
and
tend to
so
do that.
I didn't like it. And that's why I say it's as I've gotten older that I appreciate it more. And even now, I'm not a religious person per se. I'm more a spiritual person. Like I feel like there's something else out there. I am religious, to one extent, but it's more a spiritual idea that there's something else out there. And I think a lot of people lack that. So to get back to the question, though, I don't think it should be taught in school, but I think I had a friend of mine, a very good friend of mine in New Jersey, who taught at our school, and he was Jewish. He and his wife, every year they'd make potato pancakes for the kids at Hanukkah, and they talk about Hanukkah. And I thought that was great. We had a huge Hindu population, and we had actually Diwali off, and so the students.
Wow, they don't have that off in New York.
Yeah, they had it off, and we had all the Jewish holidays off. We had all the Christian holidays off, and Indian holidays off, and I think now they even have a Muslim holiday off. I'm pretty sure they do.
Eid, right?
Yes,
Eid
that's right.
Mubarak, yeah.
And so I think this, I think in New Jersey, it's such a diverse state that the students just get to know the different religions because their friends are so many different religions. They have friends.
New York City is more like that, I feel.
Yeah, very much.
I'm from Long Island, so it's not as diverse, but New York City has a more diverse, culture, and, because of that, I feel like it's maybe similar to Jersey, where there's a lot of holidays.
Well, Long Island is definitely more diverse than, say, Western Pennsylvania.
Yeah, definitely,
but
sure.
you see, right, New Jersey is extraordinarily diverse, and so the students, it's almost through osmosis, they kind of pick up these, they get to know different cultures and different backgrounds. So I think that's great that you can talk about that in class, or why tomorrow we have off, for the Festival of Lights, and, you can talk about that in class. But to have it as a separate class, I don't think that's necessary.
Like a religious studies class.
Yeah, I don't think that's necessary in public school, and I don't. Obviously, you can't because of the separation of church and state. You also
got to be careful what you say in the class, also.
Exactly,
So,
and that's up to the
educated.
parents. Religion is up to the parents. Some parents don't want their students their children having anything to do with a religion. That's their choice. That's the parents' choice. So that's why I'm kind of off. It's a public school, and so you can't do that. You have to divide church
I would be
and
open
state.
to having a religious studies class of just everything, or at least predominant ones. Not necessarily because, like you said, church and state, that's very important, but one where it's taught of all the religions, or at least a major one. And I say that because, like you said, you're from Jersey. I'm from an area that's not as diverse.
Right.
So having exposure to those things, it could actually help people out in the long run of making assumptions about other people's religions, actually having a basic understanding of them.
I completely agree. I want to say, I think some high schools that I'm aware of have it as an elective, like world religions as an elective, but not as a mandatory class. But I completely agree with you. It's something I noticed, and it's something that's kind of been difficult for me moving from New Jersey that is so diverse, and then coming here and it's not. And I feel like sometimes it's almost my role sometimes in the classroom to kind of expose students to other ways of thinking, because if you grew up in this area, it might have been limited. It doesn't necessarily obviously mean it has to be. Depends on your experiences, but it's just different because I lived it in New Jersey. I lived a very diverse life in New Jersey, and then you come here and
it's not as much. It's nowhere near.
No,
it's
not
nowhere
at all.
near, to be honest. Like it's honestly even new to me.
Right, because I've had students. I've had students make comments that I thought were very closed-minded, anti-specific religion or an anti-gay comment, and that just puts me over the edge. I can't stand that. And so I don't lose my mind, but I use it as kind of a teaching, that quote unquote phrase, teachable moment. But I really do try to use it as a time to, discuss with that student that.
So that's where you have to keep your composure.
That's where I have to retain constrain my inner Jersey, because I just, and I use it to talk to the students and say that, just because somebody's life doesn't reflect yours or doesn't mirror the way you live your life doesn't mean it's wrong. And who are you to make such assumptions?
And judgments on
right,
people.
Exactly.
That's true.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, let me ask you, you said that students, or that you've seen students being like not believing or showing an acknowledgement to a higher power, as you called it. Why do you think that is? Like, just out of curiosity, like seeing less religious students over the years as you've worked.
I think there's a lot of people who have moved away from religion, moved away from going to church. I mean, even in my own life, as I said, growing up, my parents made us go to church every Sunday morning, sometimes Sunday nights, and my mother, on Mother's Day, they would always have like these mother-daughter teas, and they'd make my sister and I go, and we'd have to sing and stuff like that. And so it was kind of like forced on you. And then when my kids were growing up, I thought, I don't want to force it on them, but I want to expose it to them so I could see it. Gradually you start moving away from the church. And so my kids, they were confirmed and baptized. But we went to church, Sunday church, to get them confirmed. And then it's like, then you'd go on holidays. And it was just different than my experience growing up. And so now my boys are just, they really have nothing to do with religion. And I kind of blame myself because I exposed it to them, and I thought it was somewhat important in the house, but it wasn't to the degree that it wasn't, growing up for me. And I noticed that with more and more people, there's more people moving away from religion. I don't know if they look at it like, oh, it's outdated, or maybe they're too scientific now, and they say there's no proof. A lot of advancements in science. Right, exactly. And I myself, I've kind of gone everywhere. I kind of walk the line, I say, between growing up Christian and still considering myself Christian, but I also study Buddhism. And so I kind of go between, I do both.
What made you want to study Buddhism?
I can remember it. I was living in Princeton, and I saw there was this paper, and there was a Buddhist nun on the front page. And there was an article about her, and she had classes in Princeton, and she was talking about how, it really applies to the anxieties and stresses of everyday life, and it gives you like really meaningful ways to tackle, those stresses. And I thought it was interesting, and I started going there, and that was probably 18, 20 years ago. And I've been in and out of it. Like there was a center in New Jersey I started going to, and I actually just 2 or 3 weeks ago had dinner, a very nice dinner in Pittsburgh with my husband and my old Buddhist teacher, the nun had moved, and a monk came in her place, and he and I have kept in contact, and now he's in Indianapolis, but he and I had dinner, and my husband, and it's just, it's a great, I wish I took it on more. When I get stressed out, my husband says, remember your Buddhism. But I still get stressed out. And I try to remember it, but it really has great practical knowledge and pointers that you can use to kind of tackle when life gets challenging.
So it must have changed your outlook on life, do you think? Or
Well, it has changed my outlook on life because it's all about, the thing that was difficult for me is I get very stressed out. I'm like a neurotic mother. I'm like one who's like really worries all the time. Like I'm telling you, my son's on his way on a trip, and I'm already thinking, oh my God, he's going to be gone for 2 weeks.
I think that's
what
a
could
mom
happen?
thing.
No, it's worse.
Oh,
I'm like
is it?
so much worse. I'm like so much worse. I'm like a New Jersey mom. Like New Jersey moms are kind of, and I'm like that. And
sounds like my mom.
yeah, like really intense. And so, I'll start getting worried. And the whole thing about Buddhism is they teach you that the first thing is life is full of suffering. It's just what it is. That's the first lesson you learn. Life is suffering. And when I think about that, I think about like there's no way to avoid it. You're going to be stressed. Bad things are going to happen, but it's how you handle it and how you approach it.
How you get through it.
How
right?
you get through it. And I think that's missing a lot from a lot of people now, is that everyone expects life to be so easy. And so when things
it's
don't
really
go,
not.
yeah, and
It's
when
not
no,
at
it's
all.
not, and it's gotten harder. And when bad things happen, people want to give up. And I know, believe me, I've had really bad things happen, and I just keep going. And
When bad things happen, you got to respond to it too.
yeah, it's how you're.
It's how you rebound from it.
That's right, and that's the whole thing. Is that you really? My husband always used to say to me, he's like, Bobbi, any control you have over people and other situations, it ends at your fingertips. Meaning, you can't control anything that's happening. There's very minimal control you have over things. I think he's more Buddhist than me, and he's not religious at all. But it really is true. It's all about your mind. When these things occur, how mindfulness, which of course is mindfulness. That's the essence of Buddhism. Mm-hmm. Mindfulness is the essence. And
you can't control what happens to you, but how you react to it.
That's exactly.
And I think most religions teach that.
They
the
do.
Suffering, which I think is really interesting, because you see a lot of overlap and things like that.
Absolutely, and that's why I say, it's. I've talked to my Buddhist teacher about it before. I'm like, I still kind of feel like I'm Christian, because I believe tenets of Christianity. Yeah. And he kind of thinks more like, no, you gotta, it's one way or the other, but it's really up to you. Yeah. It's really up to you. But you're absolutely right. There's a lot of overlap.
Yeah. I think, speaking of religion, I think why people have moved away, in my opinion, is the institutionalized religion. Like the strict rules that you have to follow, rather than if this happens to you, this is punishment, rather than seeing it as a learning experience.
You go straight by the rule book.
Yeah,
that's
right.
A great point.
And like weird traditions, I think, is a lot of the reason why. Whereas if you see like Buddhism, I mean, I'm not as familiar with Buddhism, but I don't see many traditional or like strict rules. I see it more as like an opening of like a widening your horizon kind of thing. And
it is.
Based off what you said, I'm also not familiar, but I would take it like that also.
It is, yeah, absolutely. It's it really. There's many different schools of Buddhism, and some are stricter than others.
Mm-hmm.
I've gone to a Zen Buddhism school, and it just didn't do it as much for me, because it was more. I'm not going to say regimented, but they have more practices that they follow. Where the school that I was going to, they would have meditation, et cetera, but they would do what they call Dharma teachings, which are Buddha teachings from the Buddhas. No, Dharma is like the teachings that come from the Buddha.
Okay.
And so they would teach, these lessons, but then they'd show you how to apply them to life in the Western world today. And so I found that more practical, mm-hmm. Where, again, and I only gave the Zen Buddhism, I only tried it one time. And I've said I'd like to go back and try it again, because you can't really base, your opinion off a one-time your visit. And it certainly had its merits when I was sitting there meditating, but I like more of the interaction and more of the teaching component of it. And maybe it was just that particular day that I was there that wasn't offered.
Well, going back to education, I wanted to ask you some things about what you've seen in students from when you like first started, and at least in public education from now, like if there's a difference in skill level and things like that, or if an attention or,
One thing to add to that, I've also noticed with test scores like SAT and ACT,
mm-hmm.
it was at the lowest this year, 19.8, which is like considered below average. What do you think is like the reasoning behind that?
Well, COVID first of all, COVID is a big thing. And, I do teach online, and I think there's a good way to teach online, and I think there's a very bad way to teach online. And I think there's a lot of negative ways to teach online. I think there's a lot of that going on. And so it's not quality teaching that students are getting in person or with a quality online class. But yes, even before COVID, I noticed, to me, reading and writing skills have just gone out the window. They've gone out the window in the majority of students that I've seen. Yes, of course, you get some students that are just outstanding writers, but I'm not sure what's going on in the public schools now. I haven't taught in a public school since I left New Jersey, 6-7 years ago. But I think the focus, actually in New Jersey for a while, it was on math. There's a huge emphasis on math and tracking the students, to make sure, like in 5th grade, are they going to get into a great math course for 6th grade so that when they get to high school, they'll take, Calc BC so they can get into a good college, and there was a lot of focus on math. And we started to realize that, and then we said, well, in the school where I taught, it was an excellent school, and we had always had an emphasis on reading and writing, but then we kind of reconfirmed our attention to it and our diligence in teaching reading and writing in a critical way. Critical thinking skills were huge. We really focused a lot on getting students to think critically about what they were reading, what they were writing, how to respond to questions critically. And so that was great. But in general, I've seen, the reading and writing skills have
gone down.
Very much so.
Do you think Common Core has influenced that at all?
I don't know that Common Core has. I think it's more, I don't know that it's Common Core that influenced it. I think it's more outside influences. I think that students don't want to write now because it's hard.
Do you think work ethic also may have changed?
Yes, it's work ethic.
I was thinking work ethic because when in high school, I also noticed kids didn't show up to class or stuff like that. The mentality, I think, has changed. I'm assuming has changed over time.
Yeah, it's work ethic. I think that students, I can't remember what I just said a second ago, but it was, I think the fact that students, about the work, as I said, I think I mentioned in class before, I could give a student, a writing prompts. We were very big on writing and timed writing, and they were good writers, actually really good writers. But you'd always have students within 2-3 minutes that, I don't know what to write about. Even though you had talked and you had brainstormed ideas, and they'd say, I don't know what to write about. I said, but you haven't given enough time, because they want the answers like this. And I think I started having my own theories that students started, at least in the district where I worked, liked math because they could get answers quicker, and it was right or wrong. Where with writing, you'd have them do first drafts and suggest changes to it, and it's like they don't want to. After it's like, I don't want to change it. I already did it one time. I don't want to do it again. They didn't want to do the hard work.
And they get a bad grade because of that.
Right, and they just thought, I don't want to put in the effort because writing takes effort. And not that math doesn't, certainly, but you get the answers faster, and it's right or it's wrong, and you move on. Where writing, it could always be better. My writing, and I've gone through grad school, and I've written so many papers. I could give a paper to another instructor, and they could say, I'd change this, I'd change this. Writing, it can always be improved. You really can't settle and be like, this is a masterpiece, this is done.
Well, what's caused that mentality shift, though? Or has there been a shift? From when you did start, did you see, you said that reading and writing's gone down.
Yeah, reading and writing, and I think that I think technology has a lot to do with it.
Especially video games.
Yeah, video games. And I really am not one of these ones who says video games is to blame for everything, but everything in moderation, If you're constantly playing video games and you're you're on the phone and you're constantly getting answers to things, etc., I think your ability to focus on a task and get it done well is very difficult, because you are so focused on, you're multitasking, you're answering the phone, you're looking at this on your computer while you're talking on the phone, and you're not focused on one thing. And so I think students, when they're growing up now, and so many kids have phones at such an early age, and of course playing video games for hours on end, I think that really has taken away their ability to think critically and to really work at a problem and work at a task. Because the answers are right there.
So
you could say the opposite,
yeah,
though.
I think so, too.
You could say the opposite, some more complex video games encourages people to think. There's certain tasks. But so do you think there's a bigger abundance of easy Or do you, I mean, it could be because kids grow up with it nowadays,
Right.
with iPads
And I agree with you, like
tablets
there's, depending on the game, it's more complex, but you usually enjoy the video game you're playing. Homework's usually not enjoyable, right? So you're more willing to dedicate that time to playing the video game because you get enjoyment out of it, right?
Yeah.
So you're willing to dedicate that time and figure out the complexities of the game. Now when your teacher gives you homework to do and you're like, oh my God, it's going to interfere with
quadratic
right,
equation
right,
now.
exactly. And it's going to interfere with my game playing. And so it's kind of like what motivates you. Well, I want to solve this problem because I'm having fun playing the game. And yeah, I could get a bad grade, but what the hell? I'm having fun playing this game. It's
Sounds like a lack of focus on the right.
well, yeah, I think that there is a lack of focus because, again, I think that technology, everything is right there, and you have these answers so fast, and you don't have to focus on trying to find the answers. I think I was talking about this in class last week about when I was young, when I was in college, when I'm going to the library and just really spending so much time researching papers, like getting books and books and books, just trying to find one little sentence or one little paragraph that I could use in my paper. Now it's like everything's at your fingertips in Google. And, obviously work still goes into writing a research paper properly. But, I think that this ability of technology to answer hard questions so fast, it's kind of the machine has taken the place of the human.
But that's really dangerous, though.
It's very
because somebody can
dangerous.
influence that information.
It's very dangerous. And that which leads me to, how I feel about social media.
Oh yeah.
How I feel about social media. And
Screen time's also a big problem. I feel like a lot of people now are on their phones like a lot of hours.
yeah, it is. People are on there a lot of hours. And as I say, everything in moderation. I have a Facebook. I have an Instagram. I don't use it that much, but it really will suck time right from your life, looking at this. And it's not reality. I was on Facebook for a while and I got off for 7 years because I couldn't take it anymore because I just felt like everything on there is fake. People aren't going to put up ugly pictures of themselves. People aren't going to put up the fact and say, I haven't been on vacation in 4 years. We couldn't afford it. They're putting up, I went on this fabulous vacation, and it's not right, exactly, and filtering it, and they're not showing you how life really is. It's rare that you see something that life really is, and I couldn't take it anymore, and I was off it for like 7 years, and then I think about a year and a half ago I went back on, and now I'm thinking again, I got to get off it. I see too many of those animal videos. I told you, the animal videos pull me in, but. There's too much drama, and I feel like there are times, especially if my husband's traveling and he's not home, there's too much time that I sit there and I just start looking at it, and it's like draining.
The algorithm of the social media gets
exactly.
the viewer,
it's addictive.
Attracted to the
and so
content.
I really sit there and think I just have to squash my account again because I don't like the fact that it does take too much time, but there is so much influence about it. We talked in class about the influence that social media has, and it's terrifying actually that the media and social media have.
So do you think schools should adjust their approach then?
What do you mean, such as?
Like having curriculum more based on critical thinking rather
Yes.
than for me, I don't know why multiple choice tests exist. They're really dumb. And I've benefited from them a lot in
I
my
have too
life.
recently.
Yeah.
But multiple choice tests, it's.
I told you that was the thing in New Jersey it became a thing where it's like you don't give multiple choice questions. It's all essays. I used to have a poster in my classroom and it was just a big question mark because I said to the students, I just want you to always question why. Why does this exist? Why does this happen? When did this take place? And why, under what circumstances, et cetera? It's up to them to collect the information. Mm-hmm. And it was really important for them to think critically. And that became a huge focus of our English department. Mm-hmm. Huge. And I think there's a lot of that missing. I think there's a lot of people, you could see it politically. You can see, the both sides. It's so divisive, and I think it's because so many people get their information from social media only. But it's the media itself has become very divisive, very divisive. Instead of just delivering the news, they have to deliver it with a slant on both sides.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's really up to us to look at both sides. As I've said before, I scan through everything. I look at CNN, I look at Fox, I look at the New York Post, I look at New York Times, I look at them all, but then I have to make my own decisions, but I'm a grown adult, so I can do that. I've had a lot of experience doing this, but I think if you only focus in on one way of thinking about it and you get pulled into that rabbit hole, then that's where you're going to be easily influenced and the critical thinking goes out the window.
Well, what if you instituted it in math? Because like you said, you think students are better at math. So like, say you're 6th grade, you're
Well, they
learn...
were at the time. Then we kind of moved them back, but go ahead.
But anyway, what I was going to say is that let's say 6th grade, you're learning the Pythagorean theorem, right? Instead of like spoon feeding the information of what the formula is, you literally give out the issue that Pythagoras was facing and say, solve this, right? Like how would you figure this out?
Right. No,
And you have to
agree.
think through of how to create the formula rather than spoon feed the formula.
Do you think that would be efficient?
I think so. Like
I think it would be hard for the student to figure it out.
Well, it would be hard, but that's life.
Yeah, that's true.
That's the whole thing. Plus, they learn patience.
What's the
Yeah,
important
that's
thing? To me, the important thing is not the math that you're learning, right? I mean, it is important, especially if you're going to go into a field like architecture. But the important thing is the skill that you attain from the math. And I think that's lacking in pretty much almost every class that you could take in a high school or middle school.
You have to have background knowledge. I mean, you think about my husband's job as a pilot. Everything is so automated now. What if the automation fails and the proverbial hits the fan?
We got to start thinking for ourselves.
Right. You have to be able to start thinking for yourself and problem solving, or you're going to crash.
Yeah.
Right. And
well, you could say the same politically. Like right now, people don't know how to think efficiently
They don't.
and properly.
Or who to vote for. They'll just go by what the media says.
they go by what they're being told, and they're not thinking deeply. You can sit there and say, I'm all for, adding money to this, or I like free money, or I like this. But then you have to think, well, it's not really free. Where's it coming from? You can't think, well, I'm going to be on the receiving end. I'm going to get this, I'm going to get that. Eventually, you're going to pay. Somehow you're going to, and eventually you're going to pay. Mm-hmm. So that's, just one example. But politicians are going to say whatever they want to get elected. They're going to tell you what they're going to do for you. A lot of the times, of course, it never comes to fruition. Mm-hmm. They don't follow through on their promises, or it's very complicated. If you might introduce legislation and it never gets passed, etc. So there might be attempts, but a lot of times they're telling you what they want you to hear because they want to get elected.
Yeah.
It's like a car salesman. They want you to buy the car. And so they're going to tell you all these things you want to hear, but you also have to look at past behavior. So if they're telling you now, well, this is what I'm going to do for you, you have to think, well, he's making these promises or she's making these promises, but what have they done in the past? Like, what does their record show in the past? That's one indicator that you can use to educate yourself.
Have they kept their promises?
Have they kept their promises before? And so, that's one way you can look at it and say, that the past behavior is often indicative of future behavior. Not all the time, but I think there's too much of this influence, the social media influence, but there's really the genie's out of the bottle. What are you going to do about it at this point?
I think schools need to adjust their approach.
Such as?
Just like what I said.
About the critical thinking.
Like critical thinking. Like,
yes.
I think, when you just look at the school system itself and how, it's really emulated of back when factories were a big thing, like 100 years ago
Mm-hmm.
or so. And so when you look at that, I mean, just getting spoon-fed information and having it based on memorization, I think is a problem, because I think that's what it is based on. That's what it's based on, right? Like, can you memorize this for a certain duration of time to take the test and pass?
Right.
Whereas, can you think through how to solve difficult problems? Can you reflect on mistakes? Can you communicate effectively? Do you have the tenacity to figure out these problems? Those, to me, those skills are way more important in all facets of life than you having to memorize it. I mean, that's the skill you're
Right.
learning. How can I retain this for this duration of time
Right.
to get through what I need to get through?
Where when you're putting more, sweat equity into solving a problem, you're more likely to remember what it was that you did.
And you might be more engaged and more
Exactly.
entertained by what you're learning.
Right. It's kind of like on-the-job training,
Yeah.
but it's in school.
Right.
When you could go to school and for becoming a nurse or something, and you're learning in class all of these things, and you have to memorize them for the, for the test, et cetera. But it's not really until you're out working with patients that things start to make sense. And the more you do, the better you become at it. And it's the same with teaching. You could sit there and learn in a graduate class how to teach social studies or math or whatever.
But you got to do it.
It's not until you do it that it really makes sense. It's not really until you do it that it makes sense. But you are absolutely right. The critical thinking is missing. But teaching the students to persevere, and that answers aren't going to come easy. Answers are not going to come easy. But if you put through some perseverance, you have patience to accomplish the task, then you will be rewarded, quote unquote, with the answer.
Yeah, and with skill.
And with the skill
Yeah.
that was necessary. That is missing, I believe, very, very much so in public education nowadays. And again, it's been quite some time, but I see it though. I still see it in my work, and papers that I get. And it's sometimes you sit there and think, did the student really understand what they were writing about? That they put these words down, but how much of it was that they were getting from the computer or from the book? And
Right.
they, when they have to explain in their own words, there's
they
kind
do
of
it?
difficulty. Right, they can't do it.
I think that's rooted a lot in that mentality problem. Like, I think the status quo of what we're talking about has also been a contributor to this mentality of do what you have to, do the bare minimum to get by. And then, where's the excellence? Where's the perseverance? Where's the resilience?
Well, that goes back to what Devin was saying too about the work ethic.
I think the expectations.
Yes, exactly.
The
Yeah.
expectations have become lower, maybe because the students have been work. I don't know because
I
of
don't
that.
think that. I just think that we need that the approach is a little outdated,
I mean,
right?
it's-
Like back then, you had to go and do factory work, so it made sense to do what we were doing. But nowadays, people don't need the backbreaking work. It's not in demand as much as it is today, right? Like what most of our jobs are manufacturing are in China. They're not here in the U.S., so we don't need to memorize certain formulas or things in life. And what's more important is to learn how to think. I mean, that's like the most important thing you could ever do. It fosters innovation, just being able to think. And I don't think people genuinely actually know how to think. Like, what is the process of thinking? I don't think people understand that.
Right.
I mean, they'll ask their teacher. They'll look.
They
it
want
up,
the answer,
or-
right? And
It's
like I said,
accessible,
with
what we said before.
mentality, that's not good for the morale of our country at all. Like just doing the bare minimum to get by, to get the grade that you want, and then to move on to the next step.
They just try to get you out of
It's-
high school. And
Right.
get you
But
that
where's
diploma.
the excellence in that? Where's the
There's no
nobility?
excellence
I know.
Where's your nobility in that?
I don't know if I told you guys this story in class. I usually tell students, but my very first paper I had due at Syracuse, I had this paper, very first paper. It's a 10-page paper. He says minimum 10 pages, minimum. And it was for a psychology class, and I thought I did primo job. Like this, I thought this is exactly what this guy wants. I still have the paper. I thought this is exactly what he wants. This is some kind of fabulous. And I submitted to the professor, and he sends me back a write-up, and it was, this is not what I want to do it over. And he wouldn't even grade it. Wouldn't even grade it. I thought my life is over. I'm going to fail out before I even started my very first paper. And I thought, I'm going to fail. I can't keep doing it. I would remember crying. I was so upset. And, but what I did is I went back through all of his notes, and I took them to heart. All of the changes he said to make, I went back, and I ended up doing well in his class, and I ended up taking every single class he offered. Professor Clive Davis at Syracuse, he was great. And I ended up taking every single class that he offered. And you know what? That's where I thought I really became a great, I shouldn't say great, a very good writer, because I am a good writer. And I think it was at Syracuse because, and this is another thing we were doing in New Jersey, I think when I was there, it was like every instructor thought it was their duty to make you a better writer. Because writing is not just for literature, right? You write in history, you write political science, you write in a French class. Every class contains writing. And so I was very fortunate in that my professors that I had there, they would give me voluminous feedback. It didn't matter what the class, science class, biology classes I took, they would give voluminous feedback about my writing and my papers. Writing for science is different than writing for history. And that's where I really think I started to excel in writing.
Do you think there's a difference in diversity of thought from when you were in college versus today? Because a lot of people say that universities and academia is very liberal, very one-sided. Would you agree with something like that? Do you think it was different back then than it was today? Or do you think there's
I think it's
openness?
always been more left-leaning, more liberal. I think that's just been colleges in general, but I think it's more open now. I think it's more of an open secret now. I think before people looked at it and thought, that people go, oh, you're there to learn, it's broaden your horizons, and they tend to think of left-leaning as more open-minded. Mm-hmm. And so I think college in general has, in my lifetime has always had that belief that they were more left-leaning, more liberal. But I think it's become it's become more striking of late. I think it's been more striking the last several years.
Very transparent.
What do you
Yeah,
mean
it's
by
very
that striking, though?
It's been more obvious.
It's very
much
clear
more
when you go to the
obvious.
school that this
Yeah.
is what they support.
Well, there's like allegations of people getting poor grades.
Yeah.
Do you think that happened now?
I know,
Like,
I will say, my experience at Syracuse was great. My instructors were all awesome. And I had one instructor, and I found out early on it was her way or the highway. And if I didn't align with her beliefs, if I did not jump on her bandwagon, then I was not going to get a good grade in that class.
Sometimes you got to do what you got to do.
I got to do what I got to do. I got to get a passing grade. So that was one class that I felt that, yes, I had to change
to
how
suck it up.
and my whole point is it's college. You should be expanding your horizons. You should be, if you're talking politically, looking right, looking left, looking central, it's a time to explore different points of view. But it's almost gotten to the point where it's only one point of view.
I would say that 100%. I would say teachers are either
Not in my class, though.
neutral. I would say professors are either neutral or they're completely, they just forget neutrality and go out the window.
I try to stay very neutral.
Right. See, that's what I mean, though. There isn't a right side of it. There's a dominant left side, small minority of neutrality. There is no, right side.
I would rather you see neutrality.
Yeah, I would too.
Yeah, I
right?
would rather you see neutrality. I would rather you see neutrality because it's not up to me to tell you how to think. It's up to you to figure it out.
Yeah.
I try to give you in the classes that I teach, the political science classes, I try to stay middle of the road. I tell you how I feel about certain things that I say, fiscally I tend to be a little more conservative, but socially I tend to be more liberal. Mm-hmm. And when I'm exposing you to different ideas in class, I try to stay middle of the road.
Mm-hmm. Just say it how it is.
Sorry?
You just say it how it is.
I say how things are, though, sometimes. But not like politically.
Not politically,
no.
no.
But people can say what they want.
Yeah, in my class you can say whatever you
Right.
want. I don't care what you say.
Yeah, and I mean, that's appreciated a lot because you don't see that. I think the university should be a place where diversity of thought is prominent and
Right.
not one-sided.
It absolutely should be. You are there to learn, and you are not just there to learn a subject. You're there to learn how to cope in life.
Right.
It's a transitional time in life that you're going from high school, or maybe you're coming in a little bit later, but you're going to your next step in life. Mm-hmm. And you have to learn to get along with different points of view and people from different backgrounds. And how are you going to do that if you're taught one way to think? Mm-hmm. And so I look at it that I'm not here to tell you how to think. I want you to think for yourself. But I do appreciate in the class, and I say it right at the beginning of class, at the beginning of the semester, and I remind everyone throughout the semester, I don't care what you say. You could say something as long as you're not purposely targeting people, mm-hmm. And saying something directed to someone that's offensive. But you have left-sided views, right-sided views, whatever, share them It's not going to impact how I think about you. It's not going to impact your grades, nothing. I want to hear what you say, and the paper that you'd write and your feedback in class, and your questions that you might have in class. I want to hear that feedback because you are not me and I am not you. I can't tell you how to think. It's not my job.
A lot of classes lack that too. Like, I don't think a lot of
drives
classes.
me
Well,
crazy.
I think that's because you value speech. You value speech, and I think most professors don't value speech. Like the idea of freedom of speech, freedom of thought.
Well, sometimes the people who complain the most about they want freedom of speech, they only want freedom of speech if you agree with them.
Right.
And that's not freedom
I'd
of
say
speech.
that's prominent on university.
Yeah, that's not freedom of speech.
Mm-hmm.
That's selective freedom of speech.
Yeah.
And I'm not okay with that. Because I don't like getting in disagreements with people. If I have a differing point of view and they have a different point of view, but they don't want to hear my point of view because it doesn't align with theirs. So then where does freedom of speech?
but
It goes right out the window.
It's are you seeking truth then at that point? Are
No,
you trying
you're
to push
looking-
an agenda, or are you trying to seek truth to
You
find
might be
what the-
pushing an agenda. You might be looking for supporters of your point of view.
Right. And that's what I think it's the latter more often than not.
I think that's become more and more a state of affairs in the U.S. Unfortunately, I think there's, it's the rallying cry for freedom of speech, and again, it's selective freedom of speech. It's freedom of speech, but you must agree with us. Otherwise, we don't want to hear what you have to
Disagreements
say.
are not okay.
No, disagreements
That's
are not
basically
okay.
what it sounds like.
Disagreements are not okay. And that's why I said this is why I like this, because, so far we really haven't had anything we disagree with. But I think it's a sign of obviously a mature level of conversation that you can sit there and talk to someone who believes totally different than you. But then you can say goodnight and have a nice night, and the next
Yeah.
day come back and everything's cool. No one's mad at each other. And how do you grow then? How do you grow? If everybody
have to look
believes
at the
the same
other
way you do,
side.
how do you grow?
You have to look at the other side.
It
in order
feels
to
like a
grow.
game of tug of war. It's like there's two sides. Who's gonna win? It's not like we're all citizens. Let's attack the problem.
Right, exactly. It makes us more divisive. I think there's been too much of a focus now on how people are different, and let's celebrate how people are different and different points of view completely. But we've got to find some commonalities too. And if you're not willing to hear what I have to say, and I'm not willing to hear what you have to say, how are we ever going to find them?
Right.
And as you say, work toward that problem.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's a sad state of affairs when we can't do that.
So do you think universities contributed to the divide in the country?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I do. And I know I work at one, but that's the way I feel.
Yeah.
I'm entitled to my opinion, and I do. But it's obviously, as we've chatted about, it's not everybody.
Mm-hmm.
It's not everybody. That's not how I run my classroom. And you said you have other instructors. That's not how they run their classroom either.
Mm-hmm.
But I appreciate the fact that at the end of my class, when I give you anonymous, everyone has the anonymous feedback, and even the one that comes from the university, it always says about how the students enjoyed my class because they could say what was on their mind.
Mm-hmm.
And that means the most to me. Honestly, that means the most to me.
And students learn a lot more from experiences like that, being able to speak in class, I feel.
Right. They're not only learning about the subject, but they're learning about the different points of view, which is so important because as we were talking about a moment ago, how do you grow as a person if you're only being surrounded by people like you? That's boring.
And you also may come to a consensus in these debates too. Maybe, I don't know, you may learn something new.
Exactly. You may, if you listen, if you're willing to listen to another point of view, you may change your mind. Mm-hmm. And you may start thinking about a problem or whatever is being discussed in a totally different way. It may be completely eye-opening for you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So where do we go from here then? Right? Both in the country and in schooling with education.
I don't know how it can be fixed at the educational, like the university level. I mean, what do? You're going to clean house, get rid of everybody? You can't do that.
Yeah. Clean house.
You can't do that. I don't.
It'll be a tough
Maybe it
process.
starts when you're talking about. Maybe it starts at the lower grades when you're teaching critical thinking, and you have to start teaching students to learn to think for themselves. Maybe that'll change. Maybe the generations coming up, certainly younger than me and even younger than you two, that maybe eventually they'll start having that complexity of thinking, where that when they hear it, they think, well, I'm going to decide for myself. I have the skills enough that I can decide this for myself. But I really don't know how you get rid of it at the university level, because it's so ingrained.
Well, that, and it's like a lot of it's private. Publicly
funded, a lot of publicly funded universities.
And I was just going to say that. Maybe we have to enact state laws that say if it's publicly funded, you have to follow.
No, I don't think that'll ever happen, because the thing about college, again, then you have instructors, professors saying, well, then you're curtailing my freedom of speech, and so
it would be a huge process.
Yeah, you don't want You don't want to curtail someone's freedom of speech, even if they might be curtailing yours.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean?
No, 100%.
So you would have pushback there. I can't imagine, that, okay, well, unless, that tax, money, we're not going to give this much to you unless you change your ways. How do you do that?
Yeah.
How do you do that? I think more and more parents have become aware.
Well, that's how it is at a public school level, though. Like you have.
No, but I'm talking like college now.
Okay. Yeah.
I'm talking like college. College, the thing about, teaching college, there's much more flexibility to teach how you want.
Mm-hmm.
You obviously have guidelines, you have a syllabus that you follow and stuff, but how I teach is different than how you would teach in the lower grades.
Like high school.
Yeah, where it's much more regimented. Right,
yeah.
Exactly. And there's more oversight by parents and whatnot. But I think parents are starting to ask questions when they're looking at schools for their kids to go to in college, and they're starting to think, maybe I don't want this influence, that I'm hearing too many stories come out of here that look like, that they're trying to brainwash my kids, quote unquote. Mm-hmm. And so maybe I'm going to steer them away, and I'm going to go to a school that's not so much known for that, although, I don't know how that'll happen. But, not that anyone's looking to brainwash, it's just that's the way sometimes it comes across when you can't have the exchange of ideas.
Yeah. Well, hopefully we get there, but we gotta wrap up. But thanks for coming on, Bobbi.
Yeah, thank you.
We loved your ideas.
Yeah, I'm
really appreciate it.
No, you're very welcome. This was fun. I enjoyed it.
It's a call with you, it's a bright one. Now I see it like, cause baby, you the right one. Dancer, she got me moving like she's